Hi, shalom friends. You know, it's remarkable how much energy and time we expend worrying. I mean, just think if you had the possibility of hiring someone to do all your worrying. I mean, how wonderful your life would be. But actually, you probably wouldn't find such a person simply because he would always be worrying, would you be able to pay him? So we're back to square one. We have so many worries, and it's really debilitating. Well, I'd like to share with you just something you already know and have heard, but now you'll hear it again. And that is that the vast majority of worries are not only unwarranted and unproductive, but are downright silly because they're not your worries. Here, let me illustrate this with a famous story of a matchmaker who lived in Eastern Europe some 100 and maybe 50 years ago. In those days, the laws of modesty were very strictly enforced, and essentially, if you wanted to court and to date, someone had to act as an in-between. So one day, this young man comes to the matchmaker and he says, I'm interested in finding a spouse and anyone eligible. And he looks through his list and he says, yes, I actually have a young lady with a lovely personality. Would you like to hear more? And he says, sure. Tell me a little bit about her. He says, well, she's really sweet and kind and generous and just a wonderful human being. But in all candor, you know, no person is perfect, so I have to tell you that one of her feet is longer than the other, so she walks with a very, very pronounced limp. And the young man thinks for a minute seriously. He said, you know, I don't think that's a problem. The matchmaker was overjoyed, because this was one of the harder ones. Says, well, you know, in the spirit of being open and honest, I see you're a person of depth. I have to tell you that she also has a stutterer. Her personality is golden. And he thinks again, and he reflects. He says, well, with a wonderful personality, I don't think it makes it. No, it's not a problem. He's amazed. He says, you know, young men, I've met many young men, and they're very superficial. I mean, I'm going to really be open with you. She has a wonderful personality, but she has a father who's terrible and a brother who's a convicted felon. And he said, well, he thinks again, he says, you know, it's really not a problem. And this continues, you know, for a while. And finally, the matchmaker says, so when should we set up the meeting? He says, who's speaking about a meeting? I'm not interested. She said, you're not interested? Every time I mentioned something, you reflected, you said it wasn't a problem. And the young man replied, yes, it wasn't a problem because I had decided that this is not for me. So essentially, the joke, it has more than a touch of realism to it. There are problems out there, but it's not your problem. It's not your issue. So why are you worrying about someone else's problem? Even stuff that you hear constantly about, without taking sides, about global warming, is that something that actually you should worry about? You could follow some advice if you feel that it makes sense to you on a personal level, but are you truly and honestly feel that by you worrying, being concerned and worrying, you're actually going to undo the harm? Or if the Amazon rainforest is diminishing, is that your worry? And I could almost hear you saying, well, first of all, someone has to worry about it. And the answer is yes, there are people that are paid to worry about it. They're called scientists, and they're called people that work with climate, and there are also people who are in charge of public policy. They worry about it. If you want to be involved, get as much information as possible, and then give your input. Well, worry? No, we don't worry. You say, well, one second. But there are other worries. For example, I'm always worried about health. Stop over here. You worried about health? What are you worried about? Are you worried or anxious that tomorrow the sun will not rise? Why are you worried and anxious that tomorrow you might not be able to get out of bed? So, well, I'm 40 pounds overweight. There's something to be worried about. No. If you're 40 pounds overweight, you shouldn't be worried about it. You should be losing weight. You know what to do, and it's up to you to make that decision. Worry is not in the equation. Either you choose to live with the weight, or you choose to get rid of the weight, though it's going to be strenuous. But worry, what's there to worry about? Make a decision and live with it. I know it's simplistic, but think about what's going to happen today. Make a list of all of your worries. Can you do that? And then divide the list into which ones are my worries and which one are really worries that I hear from others. And then make a sub-list. The worries that concern me, is worry a suitable response? Or is there a much more effective way of dealing with this? Now, what I'm telling you again, you know this, and there are thousands of self-help books. So why is a rabbi saying this? Because worry comes from a spiritual flaw. The spiritual flaw is somehow our belief in God doesn't translate that the great God that we believe in is actually involved in the mundane and ordinary activities of human beings. It's so much easier to believe that there's a great and glorious God who created the world, who continues to create the world, who has legions of angels. I mean, everything lofty, everything spiritual, everything awesome and majestic. But this great and awesome God, to be concerned about whether or not the car will work, or whether or not there's enough food in my house, or whether or not little me will get a promotion, to us, in a very incorrect way. We believe God's too busy for that. Go back and reflect upon an interesting thing. Do you know that we were born with the inborn trait of belief? Now, of course, there's no way to prove this, but an infant is born and it's looking for nourishment and sustenance, and it's given milk. The baby cries, it expects to be fed. It doesn't worry about food. It knows it will come. And as this baby or infant grows, children depend completely on their parents. They expect mommy's going to be there for them, and only under rare and unusual circumstances is she not. So I mentioned an infant, but you really can't figure out what an infant is thinking, so think about a toddler. And we were all once toddlers. Or think about a 5-year-old. They do not worry if there's going to be dinner. They want dinner or they don't want dinner, but they don't worry about dinner. They don't worry about clean clothes. They don't worry about sleeping at night in the bed. And in an unusual circumstance, when they ask a question, will we? Very often the adult says, don't worry about that, my beautiful little child, I'll take care of it. So where does this change? We're actually programmed to believe that a higher authority, a loving authority, a superior authority will take care of our needs. Somehow, we've decided that God is too great to be concerned about petty things. And we're wrong. Because God's greatness encompasses everything. And perhaps we could say it in a different way. There are no petty things. Man is the crown of creation. each and every one of us, in the eyes of God, is an only creation. And as a result, every need and every concern of ours is very important to him. So friends, if you find someone that will do the worrying for you, please pass on the number to me. But in the meantime, why don't we both go back to the basic truth? There is a God who is my God. And my God will take care of me because he is my God. All that I have to do is address my concerns to him and to let my God know that I'm trusting him and that, please, he should not disappoint me. May we all be able to recognize and realize the trust that we are already born with. Shalom.